Okay, let's do this. So welcome to another video. With the last one, we finally cleared the part of the series that introduced you to 3D modeling and all the tools, the shortcuts, and the techniques involved in its workflow. And now we can finally start to talk about the exciting and rewarding things like lighting. Now, lighting is a world of its own, and it is how we tell the story of an image, an animation, or a character. And soon we will have an in-depth masterclass on it. But in this video, we will just start with a simple first pass at 3-point lighting. Now, if you remember in video 16, that was a major lecture, and among other things, we talked about light as a wave in the electromagnetic spectrum. Now, in this video, we won't go back to the quantum realm, but I just want you to think about the fact that waves interact with each other and they can amplify or cancel each other, and that another type of wave you are familiar with are sound waves. Now, if you think about music, you may know that some notes go well when you play them together at the same time. And when you do, you then have chords. Now, setting up a 3-point lighting system is just like that. We are putting together 3 lights that go well together. Now, here I have a sculpture of Jinx from the series Arcane, which I'm sure you are familiar with. And assigned to it, it has some procedural clay material. But the 3-point lighting that we are discussing today is a basic and universal technique that works with just about anything, regardless of subject or material. The reason why I chose this material is because it interacts well with light, so we can see what we are talking about. And the reason why I picked Jinx is because it has an immediately recognizable silhouette. You only really need to see the outline and you immediately know, which brings me to the first light we need to discuss, the rim light. Now, in a 3-point lighting system, each light has to work on its own. Each light has its own purpose, its own name, which is tied to the purpose, of course, but basically it needs to be able to carry itself also alone, right? So the first one is the rim light. Now, a rim light is when you have a light source that is quite strong and it is positioned behind the subject when you are looking at it. And this causes the sort of outline of the subject to be highlighted with light as it warps around the edges and reaches your eyes. So this fundamentally creates a separation of the subject from the background, and that is why the rim light is super important to sort of like give depth to the scene, regardless of the scene, even when you have something as simple as what you're looking at, where you have a totally black background. Even then, the rim light alone makes it so that the subject stands out and is clearly defined and separated from the backdrop. Now, because of this, the rim light is usually the strongest, at least when you're working digitally in Blender. You really want to set this light to a really high value, really has to hit hard the subject on the other side, and then some of it has to warp around the subject and find its way towards you, the observer. Now, when we will have our masterclass on lighting, we will cover everything that you need to know about types of lights and all of their properties. But for the purpose of our conversation in this video, let's just note that the light has a color and also a power. And as you can see, it is set to 15,000 watts. That is a lot of power. Now, if I switch this light off, we are in total darkness. And next, I'm going to bring in a key light. Now, the key light is your main light. This is what tries to illuminate most of the subject, okay? Although the purpose is to illuminate the subject without making it look flat. And as you can see, the key light works also on its own. As a standalone, it also works. It basically shines a light on the main information of the object. It is the second most powerful light that we have in the system, as it has to be the one that sort of carries most of the information. And as you can see, this one has 7,500 watts. And now, lastly, we have a fill light. Now, a fill light fills the remaining darkness. Okay, so it's like a support to the other 2 lights, and it fills in what is not illuminated, so it doesn't remain in total darkness, and so that the information is not lost. And it works in tandem, especially with the key light. As you can see, the fill light also works as a standalone light, but when I bring back the key light, you will see that now we already have an interesting situation. And if you remember, at the beginning we said that it's a little bit like music. So in music you have major chords and minor chords that convey emotions like happiness with the major chords and sort of sadness with the minor chords. Well, with lighting, we have something similar where you have colors like blue or anything in that range that is considered a cold color. And then colors that are like leaning towards red are considered warm colors. And if we open up the color wheel, if you pick a color when you're crossing across the wheel, you have its own counterparts. Now, just like chords, there are a few combinations that just work well, mostly because of exactly this principle of where they sit in the color wheel. So right now we have a kind of lighting that is overall leaning towards the cold side, right? And if you think about it, Jinx with her blue hair generally leans towards the cold colors with colors like violet and a washed down green and blue always surrounding her. And in this case, what we have is our fill light, which acts as the warm color, although it is a little bit cooled towards the blue, right? And then we have the key that is totally cool and it's closing in towards even a desaturation with the white, okay? And then lastly, I can bring back in the rim light. And now we have a complete 3 lights system that, as you can see, lights the product fairly well. And together, they each take care of doing something to tell the story of this subject and separating it from the background. So it is that simple, actually. That is just it. And what you can do then is play with the color combinations that you would like to use and also with the power of the lights. So you might want to tweak, for example, the strength of a key light or a fill light to sort of like change the overall mood. And definitely you can play with their position. So right now, for example, I have kind of inverted the power between the fill light and the key light. So technically now this is my key light with 6500 watts of power, but I've kept the same color that it had before. So now we have a much more sort of like dramatic illumination that feels more like it belongs to some night scene, maybe in an alley where there are some neon signs. And what was before the key light, now I have brought down to just 2000 watts. And as you can see, it is filling in. It's not illuminating all the details as it was doing before and has more of a sort of secondary and supportive character now. And now I have changed the color of the rim light and we have yet another effect that works pretty well because this color is on the opposite side of the color wheel where we have this kind of violet that we are now using for our main light. And for this reason, because we have this relationship, it kind of works well. So you can see we are always playing with this kind of like triangle over here. And there are combinations that just work well exactly because they work on the principles of color theory that we have discussed abundantly in our 16th video. Okay, and now before we jump into the part where I show you how to actually set this up, here is one more example from another perspective. And I've changed again the color combination. And also, because I've moved my camera but not the lights together with the camera, one key concept that I want to pass is that technically lights, they exist in the space, right? But you as a viewer move. And so if you move around, but the lights don't move with the camera, then what was a key light can become a rim light because now from your point of view is behind the subject and it's lighting up the edges of it. So for example, right now we have this light, which is sort of the key once again. And this light, which before was the fill, now it's acting as the rim because from our current point of view, it's lighting the subject from behind. And this one, which before was the rim, now is coming at an angle such that it works as a fill light. And so when you bring them together once again, they still work. They might need some adjustment maybe in the intensity, but fundamentally they still do their own job, except that now they have sort of like shifted around in their role. And if we look at the colors, then once again, we have another combination where what we have is a very cold light that is close to a blue, but it is leaning towards the warm side rather than leaning towards the greens. It's leaning towards the reds, which gives it that sort of like next to violet, purple kind of vibe. And then we have this one, which is a pink, okay, that kind of works in tandem with this one and sort of reinforces this feeling of coldness, although it is leaning towards the reds. And then we have this one, which is a very red light, very close to the orange and yellow zone rather than the violet kind of like zone of the spectrum, which puts it in stark contrast with the very cold vibes that were coming from the other lights. And this contrast, this delta, this change in gradient is what makes the things interesting. Okay, so that's it for the theory. Let's get into the practice. Okay, so first of all, if you're working from a default file, you will already have a camera. But in case you are working with a file that has no camera, the way you create a camera is fairly simple. You press Shift A and you have the usual add menu. And then all the way down here, you have a camera. So you can bring in as many cameras as you want, but only one will be the active camera. So right now I brought in this camera, and cameras are just like any other object. So with G, you can bring them all the way back, for example, right here. And from the end panel, you can change properties about them. Now, if you need to make a camera active, you need to go to View, and then Cameras, and then Set Active Object as Camera. As you can see, it has its own shortcut, Control Numpad 0. And the other shortcut that is important is the Numpad 0, which will bring you into the view of the camera. So if I press 0, right now my active camera is the one that we previously had set up. Whereas if I wanted that one to be my new camera, I should press Control 0, and that will swap the view to the other camera. Now, once you are in the view of a camera, you can go to View and click these two options. And now you can sort of like move yourself around the scene and position the camera as if you were navigating 3D space regularly. Now, in due time, we will see everything that we need to know about cameras. For our conversation today, you only need to know this to set up a very basic camera so that you can have a point of view from where you can decide which one is going to be your key, your fill, and your rim light. Now, suppose that you have picked a perspective like I did before with this back shot that kind of brings into focus her long hair. What you might want to do is to create a backdrop if the scene requires it. A very easy way to do it is to create a plane. From edit mode, you can select an edge, EZ, and bring it up. Then you don't want a sharp angle. And so what you'll do next is press Ctrl B, left click, open up this bevel option, and set a radius that makes sense for the scale of the object. And next thing, you want to set the segments to a reasonable number that will create this smooth curvature so that you have a sort of continuous surface, a very smooth surface. This in photography is also known as a limbo. And then from object mode, you want to make sure you are in shaded smooth to have the smoothest possible surface. However, in this case, I'm going to go with the absolute black background because it works for this image, so I'm not going to need it. And then you'll want to start setting up your lights. So to create a light, usual add menu with Shift A. And then from lights, you can see that we have a few options. I would recommend to start with an area light. Now, an area light will look something like this, with this sort of line going along its normal, which is telling you where the light is pointing towards. Like any other object, you can rotate it with R and move it around with G. Two other shortcuts that might be of really good use are the double tap on R, which will allow you to move it based on your point of view. And then another one that is of great use is Shift and T. With Shift and T, you are sort of redirecting the light towards where your cursor is. So you want to use it to sort of point at the place where you want the light to be focused at. And then you're going to left click, and that will align the light towards that point. Okay, so this one probably is going to be our rim light. And so I'm going to position it at the back beyond our character, right? And I'm going to give it a high intensity. And right now I'm working from viewport shading, so I can move a little bit faster. I'm going to bring back the grid so it's easier for you to follow. And then what I'm going to do is press Shift D to duplicate my light. I'm going to make sure I am into 3D cursor. And then I'm going to rotate this so that I am pretty much over here. And so if I look at this from the perspective of the camera, now I know that the light is going to go and hit from this side. And this could be, for example, our fill light. At which point, before I go back into rendered mode and start to play with the intensity of the lights and colors, I'm going to duplicate this once more, and I'm going to bring it more or less over here. So I kind of want an angle that from the camera is sort of like illuminating directly the subject. And it could be at any angle between here to probably over here. We'll see what works best with this camera view. But I'm gonna go and guess on something like this. Okay, so now we're back into the rendered mode, and I'm gonna turn off the light actually, so that I can work on them individually and make sure that they work well as a standalone. So this one needs to be a little bit stronger, and I'm also gonna change the size to 2 so that it is a little bit bigger as a source, which will allow me to have a better outline all around my subject. And then, once again, let's pick something that is not too strong yet, but probably something like this, like this kind of green color. And then I'm going to turn it off and bring back my key. Now my key, as you remember, is my main light, which is the second strongest. And I'll try to make this one also slightly bigger because I want it to illuminate a little bit more. Okay, and now I'm going to start to bring in maybe a little bit more color. We set the other one as green. So what I'll do is I'll stay more or less in the same pattern as before. And now I'm going to select something that is on the opposite side, like this pink that is very much attuned to Jinx character. And I'm feeling like I could use a touch more power over here. So I'm going to bring it back to 8500 watts. And once again, turn it off and then focus on one light at a time. This one is a fill light, so it needs to be way less intense. And this one can be in support of the other lights, both in terms of what is lighting and in terms of color. So I'm going to use this blue that is leaning towards a purple. And let's see when they come all together how it looks like. And here we have, once again, a pattern like a chord that kind of works because it's playing with the same principles of color theory, and also it's setting up the character and distinguishing it from the background. Okay, so that kind of wraps it up for this video. It was a very first pass at lighting and the basics of the 3-point lighting system. We will review it more in the future, but now you know the basics that I wish I knew when I started out with lighting. Lighting can be extremely frustrating. I remember at the beginning when I didn't know anything about lighting and I didn't have anyone to explain it to me, I felt like it was this sort of impossible problem that needed to be solved, and I felt I was really not good at it. Like I thought I was really not good at lighting. I thought it was a me problem. But the good news is that the problem of lighting is a problem that has been around for centuries and it has been solved. If you look at paintings throughout art history, if you look at movies in the history of cinema, lighting has been solved and explored in all of the most wonderful ways. And in fact, what we'll do soon is take a look at some movies and paintings and try to understand what the artist or director or cinematographer did to create some lighting that really works well. Anyway, I'll stop it right here with my rant, and I'll see you in the next video where we will start to talk about animation, and we'll see how we can lock the lights together with the camera so that when our camera moves around, the lights follow.